The unknown vessel approaches. Commander Reed's sharp, four-fingered hand trembled slightly as he gripped the edge of his station's control panel. The harsh red glow of the warning lights reflected off his blue scales, bathing the command deck in an eerie, unsettling light. His years of experience manning the Collective's frontier station had seen many crises, pirate attacks, surprise skirmishes, even massive solar flares, but nothing had ever prepared him for the anomaly appearing at the edge of their space now. "Sir," Officer Blue's voice broke the tense silence, her antenna twitching nervously as her gaze never left the monitoring station's main screen. "The readings, they're off the charts." Her voice had a slight edge of panic, a rarity on the normally composed officer. "The ship's power signature doesn't match anything in our database. It's unlike anything we've encountered." Reed felt a wave of dread slowly creep over him. This wasn't a routine encounter. He could feel it in the pit of his stomach as the unknown vessel's energy readings spiked, but not in any way they understood. They'd first detected the strange ship several hours ago, emerging from the dense radiation of a nearby nebula. Initially, it had appeared as nothing more than another trader's ship, or perhaps a lost scout vessel. They'd seen such objects drifting near the border before, harmless. But now, something had changed. The readings continued to intensify, defying every conventional scan they performed. "Run a full spectral analysis," Reed ordered, his voice steadier than he felt. "We need to understand what we're dealing with." The crew jumped to action. The officers manned their stations with sharp precision, their movements a mix of anxiety and focus. Despite the urgency, Reed knew the protocol. Deep space encounters were not uncommon in this sector, and it wasn't their first rodeo with uncharted ships. But something about this vessel felt different. Wrong, even. As Officer Blue worked frantically on the scanning controls, Reed could feel his throat tighten, a knot of unease forming inside him. Deep space was always unpredictable, but this was no ordinary ship. His thoughts raced. What if it was an enemy ship, a previously unknown threat? His mind went to the worst-case scenarios, the stories whispered between crew members about ships that simply disappeared, never to be heard from again. There had been rumors about alien forces, about hostile species beyond the Collective's borders. Reed quickly dismissed them, fears fueled by superstition, but the nagging doubt wouldn't leave him. "Commander," Blue's voice broke through again, more urgent this time. "You need to see this." The main screen shifted, showing streams of data as the ship's composition was revealed. Reed's jaw tightened as the information unfolded. There was no question about it. This vessel was clearly built for war. The material of the hull seemed to shimmer with an almost unnatural sheen, designed for maximum durability. But it wasn't just the construction that struck Reed. It was the advanced weapon mounts that appeared along the ship's exterior. The sheer scale of its weaponry was unlike anything the Collective had in its arsenal. The ship wasn't just large, it radiated an air of dangerous purpose. His throat constricted as his eyes tracked the increasing energy levels. The power readings were fluctuating wildly, indicating a core much more powerful than anything the Collective had encountered in over 2 decades. This wasn't a ship from their sector, or even their galaxy. This was something else, something more advanced. "Commander," Officer Blue said, her voice trembling with uncertainty. "The ship, it's not using any of the energy signatures we recognize. It's like nothing we've ever seen before." Reed's thoughts raced as he processed the information. His heart sank as he recognized the truth. Whatever this ship was, it wasn't friendly. He quickly issued an order to increase the sensor range, hoping that somehow they could uncover more information. But deep down, Reed knew the sensors wouldn't provide the answers they needed. Not this time. "Get me a visual read," Reed commanded, his voice firm despite the cold fear creeping up his spine. Now, the tension on the bridge grew as the crew scrambled to pull up the visual on the ship. A few seconds passed, but it felt like hours. Finally, the screen flickered, and a massive dark shape appeared against the backdrop of distant stars. The human-made vessel loomed in the void, its sleek, angular hull reflecting the faint light of the nearby nebula. It was larger than Reed had anticipated, but that wasn't what unsettled him. What made his blood run cold was the way it moved, almost too precisely, too deliberately. Occasionally, pulses of energy rippled across its surface, like lightning under dark water. There was something menacing about the way the ship seemed to absorb and reject light, hiding its true form in the shadows of the nebula. As Reed watched, he could feel his body tense, his every instinct telling him that this was no ordinary encounter. Then, just as Reed was about to speak, the young officer Green, stationed at the data terminal, made the discovery that would change everything. "Sir, I cross-referenced the design with the restricted files we have," Officer Green said, her voice pale with realization. She quickly brought up the file, and her fingers hovered over the screen. "It's human." The word fell like a stone into still water. Every officer on the bridge froze. The silence was deafening. "Human," Reed echoed in disbelief. He blinked hard, as if he hadn't heard her correctly. "Are you sure?" Green nodded, her expression grim. "It matches the records from the Great Expansion, one of the last human warships ever recorded in the sector. This is no myth. It's real." Reed's mind reeled. Humans, the ancient species, the mysterious, almost mythical race known for their incredible technological achievements and legendary military prowess. The very same humans whose presence was only known through stories of their incredible power and unmatched tactics. The stories of a human warship single-handedly holding off an entire pirate fleet. The legends of human marines boarding enemy vessels and clearing them within minutes, moving with speed and precision that defied all understanding. "Impossible," Reed muttered under his breath. "They can't be here. Not now." But the data didn't lie. The ship was human, and it was inside their borders. His training kicked in. The protocol was clear. When dealing with unknown, potentially hostile vessels, the first step was always to notify the Council and secure as much information as possible. But Reed hesitated, a deep unease gnawing at him. If the stories were true, this human warship could easily overpower their defenses and destroy the station in minutes. "Send an alert to the Council," Reed ordered, his voice steady despite the tension mounting inside him. "Priority 1. Include all scan data. And get me Admiral Stone immediately." Reed turned back to the screen, studying the human ship more carefully. It was smaller than he had expected, only about 300 meters long, but size meant little when it came to humanity. Their ships, despite their smaller profiles, packed devastating firepower into every inch. The ship appeared to be running on minimal power, its systems largely dormant, but Reed knew better than to assume that was all there was to it. Humans were crafty. They didn't need to show their full hand until the moment it counted. As he continued to analyze the situation, Reed couldn't shake the feeling that humanity was playing a different kind of game, one they hadn't yet fully revealed. The calm before the storm. The command deck of the Collective's frontier station was a place where tension had become a daily companion. But now, it was palpable in ways Reed had never felt before. The discovery of the human warship, a species that had been long relegated to legend in this part of the galaxy, had thrown the crew into a quiet panic. The vast expanse of space, once familiar and predictable, now felt like an ominous unknown. Reed stood motionless for a moment, staring at the screen as the human ship, silent and imposing, hovered at the edge of their space. Admiral Stone's stern face appeared on the screen, his normally composed expression now tainted with concern. The camera panned back to reveal a room filled with senior officers, each one's face carved with the same deep concern Reed felt. "Commander Reed," Stone said, his voice steady but filled with a simmering urgency, "I've reviewed the data you sent. This is unprecedented. Are you sure this is a human warship? How can we be certain?" Reed's throat tightened, the weight of the question heavy on his mind. Yes, sir. The scans match restricted files. I'm not sure how they got here, or why they're so far from human territory. But this ship, it's real. Stone's expression darkened, and for the first time since Reed had met him, the Admiral looked uncertain. If these are the humans of the Great Expansion, then we've been living with the ghost stories for too long. You need to understand, Commander, humanity's power was unparalleled. It's why the stories of their exploits were treated as myth. No one thought they'd still be out there, much less on our doorstep. Reed swallowed hard. Humanity's past, and the myths that accompanied it, were dangerous. The tales told of human warships that could obliterate entire fleets in minutes. Ships so deadly, they could clear enemy vessels of life without a single shot fired, using tactics that defied logic and understanding. Sir, Reed's voice wavered for the first time as the full gravity of the situation hit him. If the stories are true, we are vastly unprepared for whatever they are capable of. Even a small human warship could devastate the station in mere minutes. Admiral Stone leaned forward slightly, his gaze intense. We're not in a position to underestimate them. I'm ordering an emergency council session. You're to monitor the human vessel constantly. Do not engage under any circumstances unless provoked. Reed knew better than to argue. He nodded sharply, but the unease gnawing at his insides wouldn't go away. He had already ordered his crew to activate the station's full surveillance protocols, but it wasn't enough. The uncertainty surrounding the human ship's intentions, its apparent lack of communication, felt like the calm before a storm, one that could wipe out everything they had worked for in a single strike. Understood, Admiral. We'll proceed with caution, Reed said, trying to mask the fear in his voice. As the transmission ended, Reed let out a long, controlled breath. He turned to Officer Blue, who was still monitoring the ship's movements on the large display screen. Any change? He asked. None, sir. The human warship is still holding position, just inside our borders. No communication. No aggressive movements. What? It's impossible to read their intentions, Blue replied, her antennae twitching with anxiety. There's something unsettling about the way it's just waiting. Reed crossed his arms, his mind racing through possibilities. Why had they appeared now? Was this an act of war, or was there something else at play? Was the human warship simply scoping out the situation, or was it preparing to strike when they least expected it? Status on our defensive systems, Reed asked, his voice tinged with a cold edge. He couldn't afford any more surprises. Shields are at full strength, Commander. But given the technology of the human vessel, our systems might not be enough. We need more data, Blue replied, turning to input a new set of scans. The tension was thick in the air, and Reed felt every second drag on endlessly. He couldn't shake the unease in his gut. The stories of human military tactics, combined with the mystery surrounding their ship's sudden appearance, made him feel more vulnerable than he had in years. A beep interrupted his thoughts. Officer Green, who had been quiet for most of the exchange, now spoke with a hint of fear in her voice. Sir, I've been looking into their technological signatures again. This ship, it's not just technologically advanced, it seems to be using something we haven't seen before. It's almost as if it's designed to outmaneuver us on every level. Reed's pulse quickened. If there was one thing he knew about humans, it was their ability to adapt, to outthink their opponents. They were the masters of survival, and that reputation was built on years of overcoming impossible odds. Whatever was coming, the collective was ill-prepared for the kind of fight humanity could bring. I don't care what they're doing. Monitor every aspect of their systems and get me a deeper analysis, Reed snapped. The growing panic was starting to break through his normally steady facade. As Green worked her console, Reed's mind was torn between two possibilities. First, the possibility that the human warship was here to make contact, to offer some sort of strange, unprovoked alliance. Second, the possibility that it was preparing for something far worse. An attack, or worse yet, a demonstration of its power. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Green turned back to Reed, her eyes wide. "Sir, I found something. Their ship is still dormant, but it's as though it's waiting for something, like it's observing us. It's waiting for a signal, but from who?" Reed's stomach dropped. "Waiting for a signal?" "Yes," Green said. "It's analyzing us, looking for a reason to act. We may not have been the first ones they've encountered in this area. They've been watching us." Reed felt the weight of that statement settle on his shoulders. The human warship wasn't just passing through, they were being watched. And in Reed's experience, when an enemy watched you too long without acting, it meant something far more dangerous was coming. The atmosphere on the command deck grew even heavier. Officers worked frantically, monitoring every sensor, analyzing every piece of data that came through. No one spoke, but the tension was nearly unbearable. Reed felt like a prey animal surrounded by invisible hunters. They were in a space where their technology, their tactics, and their strategies could be rendered useless by a single human decision. The seconds stretched on, and Reed's unease deepened. The longer they were observed, the closer they were to something irreversible. The questions gnawed at him. Would humanity befriend them, or were they simply waiting for the right moment to strike? Reed glanced back at the view screen, where the human warship still loomed at the edge of their borders. For the first time in his career, he felt utterly powerless. The calm before the storm. The hours passed in a slow, agonizing crawl. The human warship lingered at the edge of the collected space like a shadow, silent, still, and utterly enigmatic. Reed had ordered all sensors to remain active, but there was only so much they could do. The ship was not communicating. It was as if the human vessel had simply appeared, not as an invader or a traveler, but as something far more unsettling, a predator lying in wait. Despite the quiet tension that filled the station's command deck, Reed could sense that the crew was starting to feel the strain. Officer Blue, usually calm and composed, had begun rubbing her antennae in agitation, her movements sharp and jittery. Green, the youngest officer on the crew, had become almost unnervingly silent, her usual bright expression now replaced by a clouded look of unease. But it wasn't just the crew that Reed had to worry about. Deep down, he knew that every decision made from this point forward would carry a heavy weight. One wrong move, one false step, and the entire station could be wiped out in seconds. "Commander," Officer Blue spoke, her voice breaking the silence. "The human ship, it's moving." Reed's heart skipped a beat. He rushed to the display, his eyes locked on the faint image of the human vessel, still far outside their defenses. It was slowly, almost imperceptibly, turning. For a brief moment, it appeared like an idle shift, just a ship maneuvering in space. But the change in its position was deliberate. It wasn't just moving randomly. It was adjusting itself, as if preparing for something. "Hold your positions. Keep monitoring them," Reed ordered. His voice was firm, but there was a creeping sense of urgency beneath his words. They needed more time. They needed information. They couldn't afford to make a mistake. But just as the crew was about to resume their vigilance, another shift occurred. This time, it wasn't just the human warship that moved, it was everything around them. The station's sensors flared, and a low hum filled the room as the station's artificial gravity began to fluctuate. Officer Green's voice rang out. "Sir, something's happening to our systems. Our energy output is fluctuating. It's like their presence is affecting us. They're emitting some kind of pulse, but it's subtle. We can't even track it properly. It's messing with our systems. Everything's destabilizing." Reed's pulse quickened. He had heard of advanced alien technologies that could interfere with electronics, but nothing had ever been this subtle, this calculated. This human ship, it wasn't just observing them. It was probing them, testing their defenses, seeing where their weaknesses lay. Reed had no doubt it knew precisely how to strike when the time came. "Activate secondary shields," Reed ordered. "Initiate backup systems across all sectors." I want a full diagnostic on the station's core." The crew scrambled to obey, but Reed couldn't shake the growing sense that they were being lulled into a false sense of security. The human ship had done nothing overtly aggressive yet, but Reed could feel the storm coming. It was the quiet before the thunder, and all he could do was wait. Minutes turned to hours, and the human ship made no further moves. But then, at 3:00 Standard Time, something unexpected happened. The communications console lit up, and a new message came through. "Commander Reed," came the calm, unshaken voice from the other end of the transmission. "This is Captain Elias Walker of the human warship Valor of Terra. We've been monitoring your station for some time, and we believe there is much you do not yet understand about our intentions. We are not here to engage in battle, Commander, unless forced to. We are here to discuss terms." The word terms struck Reed like a physical blow. He had expected a threat, a challenge, perhaps, but terms. Negotiation. Was this humanity's approach to war? Could they really be attempting diplomacy when they had the power to destroy them all in an instant? Terms. Reed repeated the word slowly, processing what had just been said. His mind raced through scenarios, none of them good. Could they be stalling for time, preparing some kind of surprise? Or worse, was this some sort of trick designed to manipulate them into making the first aggressive move? "Commander Reed," Walker continued, her voice unwavering, "we do not wish for conflict, but we will not stand down either. We understand that your station holds strategic importance, but the current situation threatens the stability of the entire sector. We are offering an opportunity to discuss the future of this region, our terms for mutual security. It's in both our best interests to come to an understanding." Reed's mind spun. Everything he had been trained to expect, every piece of wisdom drilled into him over years of service, told him that humanity could not be trusted. The stories of their legendary military prowess, their cunning strategies, their ability to crush enemies with minimal resources, all pointed to the fact that they could wipe them out at any time. But their willingness to talk, to negotiate. "Captain Walker," Reed's voice was strained as he tried to keep his composure, "you've entered our space uninvited, with no communication or formal declaration. How can you expect us to trust you?" "Because we know what happens when you underestimate humanity," came Walker's reply, cool and measured. "We know that you've been watching us, observing our movements. We are aware of the growing unrest in your sector. You may not realize it yet, but our presence here is a solution, not a threat. You've already made the first move, acknowledging our existence. All that's left now is to choose whether it will be a peaceful outcome or one wrought with unnecessary destruction." The words were chilling. Reed was no fool. He understood what this meant. Humanity wasn't bluffing. Every instinct told him that this was not the voice of a species looking to play politics or engage in back-and-forth diplomacy. This was a species that had tasted war, that had mastered it, and now had the power to shape the fate of entire civilizations. And it was clear to Reed that their power was far greater than anything he had imagined. The conversation ended, leaving Reed with more questions than answers. He stared at the now empty communication screen, his mind spinning. What had just happened? What did they truly want? Was this a warning, a challenge, or a promise of something even darker? As Reed stood there, contemplating the delicate balance he had to maintain, he realized one thing. This wasn't just an ordinary encounter. This was the beginning of something far bigger. Humanity's return was no coincidence, and now his every decision would determine the future of the collective, and perhaps the entire galaxy. He turned to his officers who were silently waiting for orders. "Prepare the station. This is only the beginning."